Well, good morning, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Dan Clement Show, a Christian political talk show. This is episode 824. I'm your host, Dan Clement, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is June 19th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we are a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And hopefully everything's going good out there with the show feed, the volumes, no echoing. I tested everything out this morning, and everything seemed to be going just fine. So good Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise, we'll continue to do this on the shows each and every day. Had a fantastic weekend. Celebrated Lori's birthday on Friday with a little personal thing. We had a going away, personal party at home. We had a going away party for some dear friends of ours at the Church of Christ in Selinsgrove. They were moving down to Florida. And unbeknownst to me or my wife, some good friends of hers knew it was her birthday on Friday. So they went and bought a cake. And folks, death by chocolate, my favorite cake. Death by chocolate. And it amazes me, folks, how it just amazes me how good chocolate tastes in a cake. It really does. And it amazes me how good friends can actually be. And my wife was totally surprised about it, and it was great. It was really, really good. Everybody had a good time. I spent too long there. I was way too long there. I still hear just a hair bit of echo in the background. I spent too much time. I was talking, had a good time with everybody there. But if I sit in a rigid position for too long, I was walking around, but I couldn't really relax. It really bothered me yesterday and Saturday. So I was laid up for past 2 days. I'm still a little stiff and sore today. I'm moving around better. I try to stretch out and walk and stuff like that, and it seems to make it feel better for a little bit. But boy, howdy, when my muscles hurt, they really, really hurt. Again, happy birthday to my wife. Happy Father's Day to everybody that is a father, and hopefully you had a good Father's Day. Like I said, I still hear a lot of echoing in the background. Let me do something here. Let me crank that down. I'm coming more and more aware that I think it's my mixer that I'm having issues with, and that's why I'm getting echoing back. And I need to push the volume out for the Blog Talk Radio folks, because they can't hardly hear, or at least on Friday's show when I was listening to before I rebroadcasted it, they couldn't hear it. And so, like I said, I think I'm just going to have to break down and get another mixer, because I'm just having so many issues with this. So I can hear a little bit of feedback and a little bit of echo in my ears, and hopefully I've taken care of it. I've pumped everything down on it. So, so anyway, hopefully that sounds good to everybody out there that's listening to it. My heart goes out to the 7 families who lost 7 sailors on the Fitzgerald over in Japan. They don't really know what happened or why it happened or how it could happen. And all 7 of these sailors were found in flooded compartments on the ship. And so that's a tragedy for the families. I know what it's like to bury a service person. And my heart does go out to these families, and that hopefully we'll find out what happened over there. It seems kind of strange to me that you have this big port and you have these 2 ships colliding in this port, and especially one's a warship with radars and everything. It's really, really suspicious to me. I mean, someone literally could have been asleep at the wheel, but we don't really know. I'm just saying, it seems strange to me on a Navy vessel like that. A couple other things. I don't have these in the show notes. These are just some things on the Google. news. If you didn't hear about the van attack in the UK outside of a mosque, there's at least one person dead. They're still investigating to find out what happened there. At this point, we don't know. We don't know if it's another terrorist attack or retaliatory attack by somebody else. We just don't know about that. The Supreme Court, I've seen where did I see that? And probably is going to lose that. Supreme Court actually was ruling, Supreme Court rules government can't refuse disparaging trademarks. And this goes back to stories we've covered over the years because of the politically correct social justice tyrants out there that don't care what the Native Americans think about it. It's how they want to virtue signal to everybody else saying, look how much we care about this issue. And we're talking about like the Washington Redskins, the Cleveland Indians. And I've long held this idea that even trademarks are free speech and should be protected under the First Amendment. I've held that view for a long time. There's a lot of things you might not think is part of free speech, which really is. And so I've held that view for a long, long time. So again, they are actually, the Supreme Court ruled this way on these trademarks. So the government can't refuse to trademark these disparaging images that they call, because somebody gets offended by it. And matter of fact, if you followed these stories all through the years, when they go interview the Indians that these social justice tyrants say that they're trying to protect or they stand for, it all falls apart in their narrative. It really, really does. Today's show is being brought to you by Rocky Mountain. Let me back up here. Not being brought to you. This is the official drink of the Dan Clement Show. They do not sponsor this show. This is something that I have invested in. This is part of my retirement portfolio. I believe in them. The cannabis oils that are in Rocky Mountain High drinks help me with my pain so I can get further through the day. And I've tested this. Now, this is totally analogous to me. It may not apply to you, but I've drank, I am drinking the Rocky Mountain High brands and everything that goes along with that. And it amazes me. It does. It amazes me how well I feel when it comes to this, the Rocky Mountain High brands and the hemp oil, 100 milligrams per 16 ounce of hemp oil that they actually put in their drinks. And like I said, it really, really does help me in my pain. And again, full disclosure, I am a stockholder in the company. And look, folks, I'm not giving you any advice. As far as financial, you go do your own research and talk with your own folks. I just know I think it's a good product, and I think it's going to do a lot of people a lot of good. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verses 11 through 14. Honest weights and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work. It is an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for a throne is established by righteousness. Righteous lips are the delight of kings, and they love him who speaks what is right. A messenger of death is the king's wrath, but a wise man will appease it. And so God has some weighty things to say about righteousness and principalities, kings, presidents, things like that. Today's quote mail comes from R.T. Kendall. He said, God is never too late, nor too early, but just on time. God is there when you need him to be there, not late, not early, but just on the exact time. Today's short Bible lesson, I encourage you to go read this and study some of the references that are in this article by Kyle Butt over at apologeticspress.com or .org, apologeticspress.org. You'll see the link in the show notes page. The Engadai scrolls and the accuracy of the Bible, and it's a very good read, not very long, less than a page on a Word document, but very informative on a Word document. again, it amazes me how they don't see that, how they absolutely don't see that. And for some reason, I am having some technical difficulties this morning here, folks. I just noticed that my streaming, there it goes back up. So you get a little blank on your YouTube there. The virtue signaling that goes on all the time out there is ridiculous. Now, today I entitled the show Americans as Ambassadors of Freedom, and I want to talk about this a little bit. I want to expand on this idea. I have a good article that I read, and Lou Rockwell does a very good job in this article talking about the unique evil of the left. The unique evil of the left. And he goes through and clear back from, he takes it back to revolutionary France and talks about how evil the left has been through all those years. And how, and this is something we see today. We see this today, where if you don't, or you're not able to persuade folks in the arena of ideas and debate your cause and get it across to folks what you're trying to tell them, and whatever your cause du jour is best for them, and people just refuse and reject it for whatever reasons. You know, we have over 300 million individuals here in the United States. We have 6 billion plus in the world, and we're not all going to agree on every little thing. You know, there's some things in my life that I would rather do myself than have somebody else do for me. There's policies I agree with that other people may not agree with, and that's okay. I think that's good, but as long as we have a healthy, civil debate about it, and we don't get mad at each other when we can't persuade one part or the other. You're not going to persuade everybody. But my point in saying this is, in this country, in this day and age, in this time, not only this country, but in the world, this day and age and this time, far too many people out there have the idea that if you don't believe the way I believe, then I have the right to force you to believe the way I want to believe. And we see that in America today, folks. We see that with all this virtue signaling. We see this in the arena of ideas, that those on the left, those in the anti-freedom groups out there, if you don't agree with their ideas, they're going to do everything within their power, including up to and going beyond violence, if you don't agree with them. And this has been something, if you go through this Lou Rockwell piece, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. We're going to look into it just a little bit here. The unique evil of the left. Hopefully, you'll understand a little bit more about the left and why they do what they do. And you know, I went back to my old left-right paradigm because that's what Lou Rockwell uses in his article. But we know them on this show to be anti-freedom and anti-liberty. They don't want you. And I've gotten in this discussion before over Obamacare with my Facebook antagonists, with folks on Twitter, on boards, you know, on social media. I'm part of some websites use the website Discuss, where you discuss things. All but the Huffington Post. The Huffington Post, they do not have comments opened on any of their articles, which is frustrating. And that's why a lot of folks have to do like rebuttal videos, and which I'm in the middle of doing. I got the script already written out. I'm doing a rebuttal video. They posted up an article about Jesus was the first transgender man. But they didn't have the comments opened on it. And I wonder why. And most articles I went to on HuffPost, Slate, Salon, Mother Jones, they do not have the comments opened on them. But we've gotten to the point in American society where we have a group of people out there, the millennials, the liberals, the progressives, the social justice tyrants, the social democrats out there that are frustrated because they can't get enough American people persuaded to follow their way of thinking. And the first step in their arsenal is to denounce folks. And I'll use myself as an example. I am high school educated as far as the books, book learning in a public setting, okay, as an institution. I went through, I graduated from Riverdale High School, 1980, go Falcons. And as far as my formal education, I should say, that was the end of my formal education in books. Now, I went on 4 years in the Navy. I learned to be a diesel mechanic. I learned a lot of other things besides being a diesel mechanic, air compressors, all sorts of things I have to do in the engine room. But not only that, along the way, I learned leadership skills. I learned how to work on a team. And I also learned that sometimes my way isn't always the best way. And somebody else might have a better idea doing something, and that's fantastic. That's fine. I've learned a lot from folks over the years that had better ideas than I've had. And then after I got out of the Navy and started driving truck and everything, I'm a voracious book reader. I love to read books. And I used to lose sleep over Tom Clancy novels. Daggum you, Tom Clancy. So I used to lose a little sleep over that. But my point in all saying this is my personal education never stopped. It has continued. It has evolved. If I had an idea that I thought was good, and I started reading up about that idea and reading both sides of the argument, sometimes it bolsters my ideas, and sometimes it destroys my ideas. So I just take them out of my vocabulary or my thought and start thinking along these new lines. Well, this is something that the left in this country, and I'll stick with the left-right paradigm for right now, the left in this country just cannot tolerate. And the left in the world cannot tolerate this. They cannot tolerate the individual making up his or her mind about how they're going to live their life. They really can't do that. And it still amazes me. It amazes me how these folks operate, how these folks think that it's okay to crush ideas because they think they have the best ideas. And getting back to my original thought processes, first off, they try to destroy the individual. Well, you're not educated. You don't have the college education I have, so therefore I'm smarter than you, know more than you. So if you're not on my educational level, you need to sit down and shut up, and we'll tell you what's right or wrong. That is egotism on steroids. It really is. And it's tearing this country apart. That one in particular, because for some reason, and this is what I can't figure out, for some reason, especially after the advent of the internet, search engines, Wikipedia, Britannica, all these different websites that you go research things, actual blog postings and articles by folks in different professional fields. And it doesn't matter to me if they're on the left, right, freedom, anti-freedom paradigm. I want to read about them, see what their ideas are, and see if they hold water to me. But see, since I'm not college educated, I don't have the right to do that according to leftists in this country. I don't have a right to give my opinion, even though I'm fairly well up and studied on some of this stuff. Not everything, but on the things that matter, like economy, freedom and liberty, free market capitalism, on politics. I'm up on all this stuff. And so, again, it just makes me mad when we have all this stuff that's going on, and the first thing they do is tear somebody down because they don't think they're educated. They don't think they're educated. Secondly, once you get beyond that point, let's say you get a couple educated folks going at it with each other in a debate. Well, then they start going into personalities. Then they start going into virtue signaling. We're talking about the left here. They start going, well, this is to help the poor people. This is to help this group of people, or this, whatever the group of the day is that they think is being oppressed. Well, we're helping these people, and your policies aren't. They're never able to articulate that completely to convince anybody, as far as I'm concerned. If you really dig into their ideas and stuff, they never really go beyond a certain measure, as it were, of honesty and reliability in their truth and facts. Because again, I talk about this a lot in the show. We have a new paradigm in critical thinking. It used to be you would approach a subject, like let's say just freedom. Okay, what is freedom? What's it all about? Is it something granted by governments, or is it something that we have before governments? Things like that. And so it used to be we'd have a question, and we go research that question and see what the facts are, what are some of the competing theories, and see how they hold water with reason and common sense, and they stand up to public scrutiny, up to debate. And if they don't, then if an idea does not survive a public debate in the arena of ideas with reason and common sense, it needs to be denounced. It needs to be put aside, like communism, socialism. It has never, ever in my lifetime and in the history I've been reading, never ever worked. And no amount of theorizing is going to make it work. It just will not work because you have too many individuals involved. In the United States, we have, and we're talking about the whole population from adults down to children, we have over 300 million people in the United States of America, and socialism wants to control every single one of them, every aspect of their lives. And I know the left will tell you that isn't so, but if you look in history, that is exactly so, because in order to have their ideas, leftist ideas to work, anti-freedom ideas to work, everybody must conform to the same ideas and the same set of rules. And it just has never worked. It's always been oppressive. It has always turned into dictatorships and has always propelled tyrants, evil tyrants, to the head of the state that do. Stalin killed more people in one day than all the so-called Christian atrocities throughout history has ever killed. One day, folks. And this is important to understand. To me, this is very important to understand. That if the ideas that you're putting forth do not pass muster, they need to be discarded. And honestly, I'm not saying never be talked about again, but today, for whatever reasons, and it has to be because, and I've seen too much of this not to know this is what's going on, it's because they are lying to people about socialism and communism. They're lying to people about single-payer health care, about government-controlled health care, about government-controlled anything. They have to lie to people, cherry-pick, and I keep saying cherry-picking facts, but the problem is, if you cherry-pick something and use it in a lie, it can't be a fact. Now, originally it might have been a fact, but if you cherry pick it and leave crucial points or aspects of a fact out, it's no longer a fact. So what they're doing is they're cherry picking true facts, rearranging, pulling some stuff out of there, and presenting it to people as truth, not being able to give examples of it actually working. Nowhere in the world, seriously folks, nowhere in the world has single-payer health care flourished and has been the end-all, the be-all to health care. It doesn't happen, folks, because eventually governments run out of money. My antagonist in Chicago, Lamont, he says, well, the government can just print more money. Well, why can't Greece print more money to get themselves out of their financial fix? Why can't they do that? There's good reasons why they can't do that. I'm not going to talk about them now, but there's good reasons why you can't print your way to prosperity. And Paul Krugman, New York Times economic columnist, is wrong when he talks about that. When he talks about the government being the last spender in an economic downturn. Where does the government get its money from? Can't just print it. I mean, it does. But what happens when you print too much money? It destroys the money. So there's a lot of arguments we could talk about out there that really, if you really dig down into them and use some common sense and use other things that go along with common sense and reason, and actually do your research and research those things, there's a lot of things out there that just don't pass muster. Um, and again, talking about the free market capitalism, I had a discussion with my son yesterday. He comes up, it's a sort of tradition. He comes up to the house and brings steaks, and I fire up the grill, my charcoal side of the grill, folks, and we cook some good steaks. Had some really good sirloins yesterday, and corn on the cob, and my veggies was onions and green peppers. But um, he was talking about, for some reason we got in a discussion about monopolies, and he works for railroad and stuff like that, and he's talking about, we talked about Walmart and stuff like that, and he says, well, monopolies aren't good. And I said, I agree, monopolies aren't good, but we've never had, outside of government, we haven't had a monopoly economically in this country. And we got to talking about the old examples like Standard Oil. And I said, well, Standard Oil, I think at its height, only had like 92, 93% of the market. Well, technically, it's a monopoly. I said, Kyle, I said, words mean things. What does a monopoly mean? You have 100% control with no competitors in the market. That's what a monopoly is. And I said, even at the height of Standard Oil, before the antitrust laws were put in by Teddy Roosevelt, they were only at 92, 93%. There were still 7 to 8% of the market that were not under Standard Oil's control. And by the time they got the antitrust laws put in, competition had knocked down Standard Oil's shares to like in the 70s, somewhere in the 70 percentile of the market share. So that meant there was over 30% of the folks, or 20 to 30% of companies that owned and did oil in the country. So competition took care of that. He said, well, what about Microsoft and Windows and the bundling and stuff like that? And I said, but they still don't have monopoly. Well, if you bought a Windows, you were forced to. I said, yeah, you bought a Windows computer. That was your choice to buy. Their product, they could bundle whatever they wanted. You didn't want it, go somewhere else. You had Apple, Macintosh, and you had Linux. Now, granted, back when I started in computing in '95, Linux was still, wasn't even a blip as far as percentage of operating systems. Now, Linux is starting to get a healthy market share, but there's never been a 100%, and no one's ever given me an example of a 100% monopoly in the economy. We are a free market economy where capitalism rules, where if you do good and you don't mess over your customers, you give them a good product at a good value, and you just do everything right, you'll flourish. But if you mess over your customers and you become predatory, competition will knock you out. Competition will absolutely knock you out. And in this day and age, I even told him, I said, Kyle, in this day and age, I use Yelp for finding restaurants and stuff, and I leave reviews on Yelp. Because if it's bad, I want people to know not to go there. If it's good, I want people, yeah, this is a good place to go to eat, to get a good bite to eat, especially when you're traveling. And that's where I use it the most, is when I'm traveling. So word of mouth reviews alone can kill a company. And so this idea that corporate America has taken over everything in America and we just can't do anything and we got to fight against the man is a false narrative. There's no facts behind it. If there are, they're cherry picked and things are taken out so they're not facts anymore. And that's, you think about it, folks, a cherry picked fact to bolster and support your opinion really isn't a fact, because you cherry picked it and maybe took it out of context, or you didn't report the whole aspect of whatever that fact is. So we're supposed to be ambassadors in freedom, and I think we need to do this at home first. Just like Christians are supposed to be benevolent, but we're supposed to take care of those in the congregation first if there's a benevolent need in the congregation, and then those outside of our congregation. And like ambassadors for freedom and liberty, we got to take care of our country first, because if we don't have a country that has freedoms and liberties, there's no way we can spread this stuff throughout the rest of the world. It's not going to happen. And then finally, in my little summation up here, our foreign policy. We keep sticking our nose in these other countries' affairs. And what's it gotten us over the years? A lot of black eyes and bloody noses, folks. It really has. And, I get in discussions all the time with people. What are we supposed to do? What? I tell them, why can't we just stick to their own business? You know, be trading partners with them. If they're doing something wrong, and we're going to get into this about Cuba, about trade and everything. If they're doing something wrong, don't trade with them. You know, and does it hurt us not to trade with Cuba? No, not financially, not economically. It doesn't hurt us at all. Does it hurt us to not trade with other countries around the world? Not really. Not if we don't agree with them. Now, there's some of our trade policy around the world has been driven by, I believe, bad ideas. You know that everybody's afraid of a big bad China, but big bad China has some economic pillars that it's been building its economy on that aren't stable. They're not concrete. They're more bamboo, and likely to crumble. And it's literally their economy's built on a house of cards. And we're so scared of these other economies out there. Well, why don't we take that fear and use it constructively and see if we can't produce some of these things, if it's economical for us to produce some of these things that other countries are producing. Now, as far as mass quantities, we're hard pressed to keep up with places like Taiwan and China and India because of the labor costs over there, the lack of environmental controls over those foreign countries that we have. And a matter of fact, a lot of the environmental controls we have on our country and industry are industry killers, and they do nothing to protect the environment. They are another part of this socialistic idea that we need to control everything in the country from a central place like D.C. that has never worked in the history of man, never. And I think our founding fathers were a little bit more intelligent on this, a little bit smarter, and had more facts at hand when they created this country, setting up and knowing that the people always come before governments. So the people set the states up, and then the states got together, at the behest of some people, and said we need a centralized federal government, but it doesn't need to be all-encompassing. It needs to be strong, but it needs to be limited to a handful, 28 things, the enumerated powers, and that's it. And we see today that principle of limited government has gone right out the window because of the erroneous ideas of socialism. And if you cannot, and I'm talking to these elitists out there, if you cannot see the evils and the outright just damage that socialism and communism has done to the world throughout history, the loss in human capital, for one thing, 50 million people killed in Stalin's Russia, upwards of 100 million people killed in Mao's China because they didn't agree with the party line. They didn't agree with the socialism and communism that was going on. That's a lot of human capital wasted. But they won't address that. Elitists won't address that. And to me, I can't even get beyond that. If a economic or governmental policy is okay with killing people because they don't agree with the status quo, then there is no freedom and liberty. I'm sorry, I don't care if there's little enclaves of freedom and liberty here and there. There is no freedom and liberty. It's government totalitarian control. And that has killed more people in the history of man than anything else. Now, getting on to Cuba, over last Friday and everything, there's been tweets. I direct messages Donald Trump. It's like he's going to see mine. But I asked, and I put this out on Facebook, and I asked a question. I said, can please someone tell me where sanctions have actually worked? Have actually accomplished the stated reasons for the sanctions? And all I hear is crickets. That's all I hear is I hear crickets out in the background. I hear crickets out there, and that's all it is. Trump on the, let's see here. Let's see, let me get down this article here real quick. Trump announces Cuba sanctions, Weekly Standard. This is by Andrew Egger on June 16th. Policy does much to undo open relations fostered by the Obama administration. President Trump announced Friday that the U.S. would strengthen economic and diplomatic sanctions on Cuba, undoing an Obama policy of more open relations with the Castro regime that Trump called terrible and misguided. Well, this is a point in foreign policy that I disagree with President Trump on. I think President Trump, the Republicans, and anybody that thinks sanctions work are totally terrible and misguided in their ideology. They have never worked. The only way sanctions actually work is, we go back to my monopoly example, is if you get every country that would be trading with Cuba to stop trading with Cuba. That's the only way sanctions are going to work. And other countries, don't, for some reason, even though they may not even be founded with this idea, and I'm talking about foreign entanglements, like George Washington and Jefferson said in their farewell speeches, that we need to be friends and at peace with anybody that's going to be at peace with us, and not get entangled through foreign policy issues. And so I think our foreign policy when it comes to Cuba is misguided, because if we, and this goes back to my Mexican immigration theories. Mexico is using us as a relief valve. If they get the troublemakers and the poor and the indigent out of their country, then they won't cause trouble in their country. And I think I'm perfectly justified, and I'm 99.9% sure that's an accurate statement about the pressure relief valve. And I believe this goes along with Cuba. Now, I didn't run the numbers on it, because I tried to run it in the past and I couldn't find any accurate numbers. But if someone could find some accurate numbers on estimates on how many Cubans, since Castro took control of Cuba, how many Cubans have escaped Cuba and come to the United States and sought political asylum, I'm spitballing here. I'm wondering if that many Cubans stayed in Cuba and Castro had to deal with them directly, how long would Castro actually stayed in power? Now, I'm not saying that guys like Che Guevara, that butcher, that these young millennials walk around with his face on their t-shirts and think he's some type of socialist hero. I mean, the guy was a genocidal maniac, and he enforced Castro's, Cuba at the edge of a blade at a lot of them died, yes, but folks, this has been the dirty little secret throughout history, folks. People have always outnumbered militaries. They've always outnumbered the people in government, and especially here in America. I hear this talk in America. Well, in America, because we're a totally voluntary force. And like I said, that's assuming that they would actually turn on the American people. And it amazes people. Founded in truth and reality. So again, I think we're misguided on Castro, the Castro issue of Cuba. I think Republicans have gotten this wrong for a long time. I think Democrats have gotten this all wrong too for a long time, because they support a lot of socialists in this country support Castro and his regime. I think that's wrong also, because he was and still is a butcher. When you allow people like Che Guevara to go around killing people, your hands are just as bloody as his are. And so it just, when I hear these sanctions, and we're talking about, I've just seen a story there on Google News talking about sanctions on Iran, and Iran went over and did some things in Syria already. And Russia's warning us about, warning U.S. after downing a Syrian warplane. Again, what's our end game over in Syria? What's our foreign policy? Who's the players? Who are we fighting against and who are we fighting for? It just amazes me that we can't get answers to these questions. It does. It amazes me that we can't get answers to these questions, and yet we're still going forward with this type of foreign policy. So the Trump administration is rethinking their stance on Cuba. Now, there is a Newsmax article out by Jim Myers, 10 reasons why Cuban embargo should not be lifted. Should not be lifted by the United States, even though it has been ineffectual. It should not be lifted. One, lifting the embargo would benefit the Cuban people far less than the Castro regime. I disagree. I disagree. If we lift the embargo, Castro can't do everything it needs to be done in an economy. There's people there that are going to do things. And when you give people a little bit of freedom, you give them an inch of freedom, they'll take a mile. And there are ways around the Castro regime, but for whatever reason, Republicans don't see that. Two, decades of trade between Cuba and market economies in Europe, Canada, and Latin America have not produced the political and economic benefits to the people that embargo opponents say a lifting of the sanctions would produce. The problem is, if you ever seen any videos, and this is the funny thing about all these embargoes, what are the year cars that they're running around in Cuba? And we talked about this before on the show. I'm serious. If I had the money and they totally lifted sanctions on Cuba and we're allowed to free trade and everything, I think one of the first things I would do is go down there and partner with some Cuban mechanics in their auto industry down there and start up just a fantastic restoration garages. I'm serious. Those guys and gals down there that work on the vehicles, keep them old vehicles going, they know what they're doing when it comes to restoration and keeping old vehicles running. And I would partner with somebody down there and start a shop up and make it the jewel of capitalism and free markets when it comes to automobile restoration of older vehicles. I think that would be a great business opportunity down there for them. And so, no, I don't agree with that, all these other countries trading with them hasn't achieved the lifting up of the folks there. And the problem is, without a lot of these other market economies that they call, these in Europe, I don't really consider Europe totally a market economy because it's administered by Brussels. It's a centrally located economy that's administered by Brussels. I mean, come on, folks. And they haven't, their trade, and this is the other thing you got to think about, folks. You have an impoverished country like Cuba. They're not going to be able to afford much anyway, and so their trade is very limited. If you look at the numbers, and I've been trying to crunch numbers and look at them, their trade with other countries is still minimal because of the distance, folks, because of the distance. All right? With us, they're 90 miles south of Florida. They're real close. And if we, honestly, folks, maybe I'm all washed up here, but I don't think so. If we opened up trade relations and just flooded Cuba with goods, the people would be so enriched. Yeah, would the Castro brothers still be there? Yes. But once people get a taste of freedom, like Russia, once people got a taste of freedom after Gorbachev, no matter what Putin's been able to do, he has not been able to staunch free market economy over there. Now, has he tried to regulate it and everything? Yes, but he has not been able to slow it down. He has not been able to stop it. Matter of fact, he's actually done the opposite. He's actually leveraged it to his advantage. So this idea of isolating countries by economics has never worked. We're supposed to be ambassadors of freedom. What happens if we have people going down there and actually starting businesses, partnering, like I just said, like, with guys, open up a shop down there for guys and gals to work in Cuba and actually bring cars from the United States over to refurbish, restore, modify, whatever, and ship them back to the United States. Just that relationship with the people will get the idea of freedom and liberty actually works, and that it empowers me, and I can do things irregardless of what the government does. And we see that here throughout Obamacare, folks. There were individuals that had just flipped their nose at the administration and Obamacare and found ways around having to get on the Obamacare exchanges. There are, and I've been hearing inklings about it and still trying to do some research on it, but there's a huge group of people out there that went on the exchanges and ordered the policies, got their forms and everything saying they signed up for health care, but then never paid their first month's premium. But that paperwork, if you look at that paperwork, would satisfy the IRS for the $2,000 deductible. So I wonder how many people out there in America went and did that, got around the $2,000 fine and penalty by the IRS, which is a tax on the American people, just so they didn't have to pay those ridiculous premiums. And whether you agree with that's right or wrong or flaunting the law or whatever, people did that. I'm almost confident they did, to get around. And just whenever, especially like in America, whenever our freedom and liberties are threatened, people find a way around them. We always have, and we always will, as long as we're good ambassadors of freedom and liberty. As long as we not only teach each other, but teach our children about freedom and liberty and what it means to be a free and liberal society. 3, opening up trade with Cuba would lead the United States into dealings with a deadbeat nation that refuses to honor its commitments. Hold the phone here, folks. We have states. Illinois is on the brink of declaring bankruptcy. Talk about deadbeat. And the United States still dealing with Illinois. Puerto Rico just voted to become a state. Now it goes through Congress and everything. There again, we have Puerto Rico as a territory of the United States, a deadbeat nation. Owes way more than it can pay back in the billions of dollars. Mainly because of the welfare state. More than 50% of the people are on welfare down there. A society cannot handle that, cannot sustain itself when more than half the people are on welfare, taking the government dole. And yet he doesn't mention anything in this article about Puerto Rico or Illinois. All Cuba's just deadbeat, okay? And yes, have they defunct on loans? Yeah. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to trade with the Cuban people, to be quite honest with you. None of these arguments he puts forth has convinced me at all. Cuba has not released all its political prisoners. Obama said the regime had promised to free during recent Cuban-American discussions. That's true, but if sanctions worked, they'd have been released already, wouldn't they? So I think we need to rethink this whole sanctions thing. Ending the embargo would be a blow to the American values. Americans want free markets with free people and not relations with that strengthen authoritarian regimes and oppressions of its people. How many countries does America trade with throughout the world that are not open and free like we are? China. China's one of them. China's one of our biggest trading partners. Mexico. They're not told, their citizens aren't as free as we are. That's a stupid, and folks, how many people in the United States deal with dishonest businessmen every day? I find it dishonest, and I have in the past. I found dishonest businessmen that I dealt with and felt that I got taken over the coals, and guess what? I didn't deal with them anymore. Are these guys like this, let me get back and get his name here, like Jim Myers? Is he going to say this about China or India or any of our other trading partners that are not open and free as we are? That's a double standard in my opinion, folks. Lifting embargo without getting concessions from Cuba would make the United States appear weak. No, rethinking a position that you've been wrong about for 45 to 50 years is not weak. It's actually pretty smart. Hasn't worked. Why hasn't it worked? Should we continue this? Good questions to ask. Does it make you weak if you rethink your positions? There are positions throughout my life I've rethought and actually went away from. You know, my Christian walk with God started out as Catholic and went through a couple things. And I tried to end up as Catholic, but when I found the truth of the New Testament out, I became a New Testament Christian. So it's not weak. See, these are some conservatives out there try to use the tactics of the left to try to put forth their ideas and try to scare people. I'm an American. I don't want to appear weak, so we can't do this stuff. Again, the arguments, in my opinion, don't hold water. Real quick here, let's get down through the last four. The embargo does not prevent Americans from providing assistance to the Cuban people. He's talking about remittances that Cubans that came from Cuba have put back is like $3.5 billion. But folks, we're talking about an economy down there that could produce way more than that. And their people could be way richer than relying on relatives to send money back to them. That, to me, and that's the same thing with the Mexican argument. And that doesn't hold water for me at all. And that they could have stayed there, created a better government, created a free market economy that would enrich everybody instead of just a few individuals, because that $3.5 billion doesn't go to everybody. It's a social state. Why don't they spread the wealth, as it were? Cuba remains on the U.S.'s state-sponsored terrorism list. That's been debunked. The United States should not lift the embargo until a new leader in Cuba is replaced. You know, the Castros could put somebody in place that's just as bad or worse than they are, just keep everything perpetual. And finally, the number 10 reason the American people oppose lifting the embargoes. I don't. And honestly, it's because of articles like this, and because they know people aren't going to go research this, that creates the problems and the ideas in people's minds. That article there, again, they were cherry picking things. They weren't telling the whole story about everything. So it happens both on the left and the right. Now, there's some other things you should go over and look at the DanClementShow.com, episode 824 on the show notes page. There's some other things in there. I'm actually doing a video this afternoon on this. Hunt Republican says Union County Democrat in response to shooting. Folks, that was a doozy there. He says, well, I'm done with political correctness about this whole situation. So he's okay with the hunting of Republicans, just so you know. There's an article in there by Scott Lincecum over at Cato. Yes, of course, we should lift the Cuban embargoes. There's a couple more articles. One at CNS News. After 50 years, economic sanctions with Cuba has failed by Doug Bandow. Over at Sydney Herald. After 45 years of sanctions, still don't work against Cuba. And sanctions don't. That's the bottom line. Sanctions don't. A school district censors faith from students' graduation speech. Again, school districts are censoring free speech of students. And there's a couple articles in there about green companies going bankrupt that you may not have heard of. And again, there's this still talking about all this green energy and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, how it costs more in green energy than it does to produce it with gas or oil. And let's see here. And also, really go look at the unique evils of the left. And we might talk about this a little bit more tomorrow, the unique evils of the left. And this is something that's very, very important. We need and should understand. So, well, folks, we're getting down to the end of the show. Oh, you know what? I started the wrong one there. There we go. Boy, we're having some issues today. All righty. Yeah, we're getting down to the end of the show. That is the music coming up on the show. Remember, we'll be with you tomorrow at noon. Lord willing, the creeks don't rise. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. And remember, you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless. And we will see you tomorrow at noon. And please go over to DanClementShow.com and read some of them articles I'm pointing out. They'd be very beneficial to you.